All right, welcome everybody. This is Jason Grant from Integral once again, and today I have a very, very special guest. I'm actually very, very excited and somewhat starstruck to be speaking to Nick Cowan from Gibraltar Stock Exchange, CEO of Gibraltar Stock Exchange. And Gibraltar Stock Exchange are doing an ICO. They're in the process of doing an ICO themselves. But very importantly, they're working on a project which is around standardizing and taming some of this ICO process. And I'd love to know more about that process on behalf of our community. So Nick, why don't you please introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about Gibraltar Stock Exchange?
Jason, thanks so much for having me today. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be with you. So just in terms of a little bit of background, a couple of minutes, we started the exchange almost 6 years ago, and we got our license at the end of 14. We opened in 15, and we were pretty traditional exchange going into the fixed income business. And we came into 17, and we were looking at going into the equities space. And really, there were a couple of things that we were looking at. One was the Gibraltar government's introduction of distributed ledger technology regulations, really important. The first jurisdiction in the world to have a regulatory framework where financial services companies that want to get licensed and regulated if they store and transmit client assets using DLT could come to Gibraltar and set up shop and be regulated. Really, really important. And I think as a first mover, that was, I think, a critical factor for us as the exchange. And I think secondly, we were looking at the token sale space, and obviously we didn't know that it was going to hit nearly $4 billion in 2017, but we could see really exponential growth in the use of utility tokens as a way to raise funds. But also, as exciting as that is, we also had some concerns. And it was really the decision-making process where we said, okay, actually, why don't we try to bring the knowledge that we have in terms of investor protection and regulatory risk and commonality of standards and best practices and really all of those sort of good but boring things, and see if we could come to the, let's just call it the ICO market, and bring some of that skill set to really just try to introduce more of a marketplace, a network where there was a basis of trust. And so we felt that the way to do that was to bring our knowledge and say, okay, if you look at the challenges right now in the marketplace, first of all, if you are a fintech or you're a startup and you've decided to actually issue a token and you've been able to justify that it's a utility, and you're going to now try to appoint a series of advisors and specialists to help you, where do you go? How do you know that advisors are cropping up every day with a new website saying, for all your ICO requirements, give us a call. How do you know the people you're appointing actually know what they're doing? How do you know if you're eligible to issue a token? How do you know that the contributors to your token have been cleared in terms of KYC and AML? Are they eligible to buy tokens? As an investor or a contributor, do you know that the issuer isn't a crook? Is it a scam? Is it a fraud? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you know that the token that you're buying has been properly audited? Does smart contract actually work? There's just so many factors that we looked at and said, okay, we could probably bring some value here. So we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, put in place a bunch of rules. And that really starts with the sponsor firms. Take your high-end ICO advisor. They are now going to be able to download our sponsor code, apply to GBX to be a sponsor. And once you're approved, you're then a sponsor on GBX. And you are then responsible, really, for bringing ICOs to market. And those ICO issuers know that when they call a sponsor firm that's been approved by GBX, they're ringing a trusted network. They're in safe hands. And that sponsor firm is going to help you as the ICO issuer do several things. One, they're going to help you differentiate yourself away from the huge number of ICO issuers that there currently are. Secondly, they're going to help you and guide you in terms of making sure that you comply with our listing rules. And that means that you're going to ensure that your white paper has the disclosures that we believe you need to put in your white paper to to be able to tell contributors what you're trying to do, what you're going to be aiming to do in the future, that you're going to have legal sign-off that you are eligible to issue the token. And basically, it just goes through all those processes. And also, once you launch your token and you've gone secondary, what are the obligations on you as an issuer to tell your token contributors how you're getting on? How's your progress? What are you doing? So we've put all of that into a set of codes and rules where there are no codes and rules today. And that was really step number one. Let's try to put in place some governance that we believe will bring best practices to the ICO space. That's going to increase consumer confidence. It's going to bring, we hope, certainty in terms of issuers knowing that they're coming to a marketplace. And really the way it works is as follows. The sponsor firm is your partner. The sponsor firm will submit the application to us as an exchange. Once we review it, and let's just say we approve it, you're then good to go. You launch your token sale. You launch it through our platform. We're a token sale platform and a cryptocurrency exchange. And you can take comfort that when you've completed your public sale, you don't have to run around trying to find an exchange to get your token listed or admitted to trading. You're guaranteed to do so in terms of GBX. So we think for utility tokens, that institutional vetting process, if you like, that kite mark that's going to help you differentiate yourself perhaps from the masses, we think that's a really, really vital part. And you're going to know that the takers of your token have been cleared by our exchange for KYC and AML. So you can take comfort that the fact that the buyers of the token are approved and cleared. And effectively, we're trying to create a liquid, transparent, and trusted network with sponsors, users, and issuers, knowing that when they come to GBX, they have a high quality marketplace where they feel confident. So it's a long answer, but it's actually quite a difficult question just to sum up it in a brief way. So I hope that helps.
Definitely. Actually, I have sort of a little confession to make here. When we started our crypto community and ICO community, the original plan was to create some sort of a framework or a document that helps people discern between what are scams and what are genuine opportunities. Fantastic. And then when I heard about your project, I was like, great, somebody else has already done it. We can sort of leverage that and, kind of build on top of that value add. So tell me a little bit, is this framework now available for anybody who wants to do an ICO to kind of download and use and follow?
Nearly. So we are in the process now of releasing our first document, which is the sponsors code. And I'll explain the timing to you. Our technology will be in place by March. And we're partnering up with a licensed and regulated exchange in Japan called Cowan. You've probably seen that announcement. So we are now sharing the tech, and we're working with Cowan to develop our tech. That will be delivered and hopefully in place by March. So working backwards from there, the first thing that we have to have at the exchange are sponsors, because you can't bring an ICO to market without appointing a sponsor. So the sponsors code will be released at the end of this week. And that will have the sponsors rules, an application form, and it allows sponsor firms to read the code and say, okay, I now understand what's expected of me. I believe I meet the criteria. I want to be part of GBX. I'm going to apply. We'll also send sponsor applicants draft listing rules, because they're not quite ready yet, but they're 99% done. So at the end of this week, sponsors, that will be the first phase. And we would expect that process in terms of sponsors applying to probably take the best part of 4 weeks, because we'll have to go and visit the sponsors, and sponsors are not just going to be based in Gibraltar. We've had companies from Auckland to Seattle express a strong interest in joining. So we're going to have to get our team on planes to go and meet the sponsors. So we would expect that to take up the best part of February. The listing rules will be released probably the end of January, a couple of weeks later. And that will allow issuers to start to look at the listing rules and really sort of gauge whether they want to comply with the disclosure and transparency requirements of our rules. So we would expect the first sponsors to be approved, let's just say back end of February. They can then start to bring issuers to market, and we would expect those issuers to, in terms of the white paper and the due diligence and everything that needs to be carried out by the sponsor firm, to submit applications to us during March. And then we would probably expect our first tokens to be approved and trading April. And by then our tech is in place and we're ready to go. So that's kind of our timeline. So Q1 is really when it's all going down at GBX.
And so, in terms of your own ICO, is your own ICO then kind of wrapped around this entire sort of proposition, and then they marry up as kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or am I sort of misunderstanding that?
No, I think you've got a very, very good point. And when we started our process, which we started in October, that's when we first said, okay, we're going to do an ICO. Let's get to work on the white paper, and let's get to really understand how this works. At that point in time, we had not yet even thought about what should go in our listing rules. But what we did know was that in terms of disclosure and transparency and best practices, our white paper and our token itself really had to try to set the benchmark. Because if you imagine RKT, the ROC token, is probably going to be the first listing on GBX, and it's probably going to be the one that all issuers look to and say, well, that's what they did, so we're pretty confident that if we copy them, then we should tick all the boxes. So we definitely started our token before we knew what the rules were going to look like, but we very much tried to stick to the knowledge that we have in terms of decades in the industry, to be able to say, okay, we actually believe, what are we talking about here? We want to make sure that token contributors have the information they need to make an informed decision. And in order to do that, we've got to be 100% transparent with regards to our business, our white paper, our disclosures, etc. So we feel confident that we've complied with our own rules.
Awesome. I love this idea that, you're practicing what you're preaching and wrapping rules around your own process and following that, and then, standing behind that. I've spent years of my life coaching CEOs of companies, and, up until recently, I haven't even heard of Gibraltar Stock Exchange. And now suddenly it's like front of my mind. This is just a very innovative and forward-looking move that you guys are doing. And I congratulate you on thinking both on trend and ahead of the trend, because I can see this regulations becoming kind of a mainstream thing, even in the ICO space. So can you tell us a little bit, because you have your wizard sort of third eye open in this spectrum, like what is perhaps this year and next year likely going to look like for ICOs? Because last year we saw a lot of kind of wild stuff going on. Can you maybe predict a little bit what maybe this year and next year might look like with regards to ICOs and regulations?
Yes, I think, look, if you look at the history of this market, I think token issuance going back 3 years was really confined to the crypto community. It was specialists in this space that understood what fintechs were trying to do and would contribute to that project because they believed that the value of that network, for example, those services, were going to create value. But like any successful market, as it grows, it goes more mainstream. And of course, you have your retail investors starting to get very excited. They're starting to trade cryptocurrencies. And in terms of where do I see the market going, I think there's going to be several key factors that are going to happen. I think number one, you're going to see the tokenization of economies go from being your traditional fintech startup trying to perhaps have an alternative to the VC model, which is where really the token issuance, I think, market exploded, particularly as the banking sector pulled away from lending money to startups. So in many ways, they help create this new marketplace. So I think there'll be a mainstream drive in terms of issuers. You saw Kodak last week. I think that's the first of absolutely, you're going to see governments issuing tokens in 2019 as a standard part of their business, if you ask me. And it will start with the small jurisdictions. But, in terms of, do you want to issue government debt, or do you want to tokenize your economy and perhaps offer tax breaks in order, to generate funds that way? I think also institutions that have been grappling with how can we get exposure to tokens when we're only actually allowed to buy securities governed by MiFID, and that's either an equity, a debt, or a derivative. I think institutions will start to also get much more involved in this space. So I think you're going to have a maturing of markets, and I think you're going to have really a couple of spaces grow. I think the utility token space will continue to grow, but I think it will become not just fintechs and early startups, but they'll be maturing in terms of the issuers. And I think, secondly, what we're trying to do at GSX is we not only are doing our utility tokens with the Gibraltar Blockchain Exchange, we're also going to hopefully by the end of 18 be offering tokenized securities on the main exchange. And we see that as a really, really big market in terms of growth, where, you know, I've been doing this 34 years, and when you buy an equity, really not a lot's changed over 34 years. You know, you call your broker, he calls an exchange, there's a trade, there's a settlement, there's a clearing, there's an FX, there's a bank, and it's T+3. I think that's ripe for change. I should be able to buy IBM on a Sunday morning on my phone while I'm watching football. And that's where I think the market is going to go over the next 5 years. So I think also that's a huge opportunity in terms of A, what we want to do, but B, how I think investors and issuers are going to benefit from that streamlined process, from instantaneous settlements and clearing, wallet to wallet platforms.
Awesome. This is just so amazing to speak to you, because you said, you know, you've been working on this for 34 years. I'm 36 myself. So, you know, it's just like, you know, it's super cool to speak to somebody, you know, with huge wisdom across this industry. Just one last question before we wrap up. I know everyone's busy. How is your framework and your proposal and process going to work alongside some of the recommendations that are coming out of US? Have you thought about this, or is this a little too far-fetched to think through?
No, I think it's absolutely vital. No, I do. And I think there's a couple of things we can do. I think, you know, what is stage one? Stage one is for us to operate under our local regulations in Gibraltar and make sure we comply with those regulations. I think secondly, when we talk about issuance, you know, we if you look at our own issue, the ROC token, we made the decision that we did not want to open up the ROC token to US investors, because we felt that currently the risks were high, that the SEC could turn around and say, actually, do you know what, this isn't a utility, it's a security, because, you know what, we can call everything a security because we can, and therefore, you know, we're actually deeply unhappy that Mrs. Weiss in Ohio has ended up buying this ROC token, which isn't a utility. So we took that decision actually quite early on. I think what we would have to do, and it's in our listing rules, is we've got to be absolutely clear on the regulatory perspective of every jurisdiction where an issuer wishes to distribute tokens. So you need to come to us with a strong piece of legal advice as an issuer to say, we are going to distribute our token. For example, in the US, here is our legal advice that actually confirms that this is 100% a utility. And therefore, you know, we believe that we are strong enough in terms of protection. As an exchange, the final decision rests with us. And as the CEO, it's going to be me that gets the call from the FBI saying, are you free for a quick chat? So we've got to be absolutely robust that if we believe at GBX that there is any question mark at all over the eligibility of distributing a token into a country, or the eligibility of the issuer to actually issue tokens. For example, if you're a Chinese corporate, you probably don't want to call us because you're not going to get through. Then we will reject the application at the earliest stage possible, so that no one incurs any costs. Just to say, look, sorry, this just doesn't sit comfortably with us, and we would rather you didn't do this. So, but you're absolutely right. We have to. I think what's going to happen is we had, you know, our jurisdiction is small enough that you know, we get access to government, and in fact, we had an event here in London last night with our minister, who's been the driver behind the DLT regulations. And he sees, it's already started, but he sees a lot more dialogue with regulators abroad, because regulators are very interested why Gibraltar has done this, the framework they've put in place, which is a principles-based framework, not rules-based. And they're genuinely interested in seeing what they can do to leverage or learn from Gibraltar being the first in the world. So I see it much more as a cooperation between governments and regulators internationally. And joking apart, I actually hope to be visiting the SEC in America in end of February, early March, and we want to go and meet with them to say, look, this is what we're doing at GBX. And I think this is the sort of thing that actually you're looking for from an exchange. And, could we talk to you about it and maybe share our experiences with you? And I think, we have to be very acutely aware of what regulators are doing internationally so that we don't end up, getting into any hot water.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing this insider view, really. I've said to a few of the ICO founders that it would be nice to, touch base again in maybe 6 months' time as things kind of unravel and so on. So
yeah, fantastic.
Maybe in principle, we can say, let's talk again in, when things are actually publicly available. And because on Integral side, what we want to do is we want to incubate about 10 to 20 blockchain startups in our virtual incubator this year and next year. And we want to kind of do it to the highest possible quality standards. And this is also where it's very relevant to speak to you and keep an ear, to what you're doing and sort of just not duplicate work and so on. So thank you so much for talking to me. And let's perhaps speak again in about 6 months' time when things are more developed and so on.
It's an absolute pleasure. And thanks ever so much for hosting me. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.